Welcome back to Reddit Tales by Uncle Sammy. I see you, I appreciate you, and I'm thankful you subscribed and keep showing up. This space is built on your insights. Leave your thoughts and lessons below. Now, cue the tension, cue the truth, let's get into it. Before I tell you what I overheard, I want to name the lesson that cost me the most. Grief can blur boundaries, and betrayal loves that blur. I was mourning my older sister, trying to be steady for my pregnant wife. So I excused small secrecy as stress. I ignored how private calls multiplied, how an old relationship was treated like harmless history, and how my calm questions were labeled attacks. This is a dramatized story, but the pattern is real. Notice it early, speak plainly, and do not let silence become permission for your peace. My name is Marcus Ellison. I was 29 that rainy spring in Richmond, Virginia. Brielle, my wife, was 28 and 7 months pregnant. She folded baby clothes with precise little stacks, then cried at a cereal commercial, then apologized like emotion was a flaw. Since my sister Dana died in January, our house sounded different, like the rooms were holding their breath. I work repairs for medical imaging clinics, so I was gone the day and exhausted at night. Brielle was on leave from her paramedic job, ordered to rest, ordered to stay calm. Brielle has a habit of tapping her wedding ring when she thinks, a tiny metallic click. When she is anxious, she reorganizes drawers and labels everything. I love those quirks because they made our life predictable. After Dana's funeral, Brielle became overly helpful, almost performative, cooking casseroles for my mother and buying flowers for my desk. Then she started stepping outside for phone calls. She would say, "It is just family," and her ring would tap faster. I told myself I was imagining things because grief had made me paranoid, but the pattern kept tightening. If you have ever ignored a small red flag because you were trying to be the calm one, stay with me, because what I overheard changed my entire life in one sentence. The first time I noticed a shift, her phone buzzed at 10:17 p.m. She glanced at the screen and flipped it face down with a practiced motion. "My cousin," she said before I asked. The smile she gave me was bright in the wrong way, like a flashlight in fog. I let it slide because she was pregnant, and I wanted to be gentle. Still, my stomach tightened. I watched her thumb hover. Then she deleted the notification. She did not say goodnight. She just turned toward the wall. Breathing shallowly, I lay awake, listening to her breathing. A week later, we ate at Starlight Diner, a chrome place near a busy road where the bell above the door never stopped jingling. Rain drummed the windows, and the air smelled like coffee and fryer oil. Brielle pushed eggs around her plate, staring past my shoulder. "You are thinking about Dana," she said. I nodded. She reached for my hand, then pulled back when her phone vibrated. "Restroom," she murmured, standing quickly for someone carrying a whole future. I watched her disappear and felt my patience being negotiated without my consent. I stared at the rain and waited, silent. When Brielle returned, her eyes were glossy but not from tears. She sat down and sipped water like she was resetting her face. "Everything okay?" I asked. Her jaw clicked once, a habit when she feels cornered. "Marcus, please do not start," she said, as if a question was a fight. The waitress refilled my cup and asked if we wanted pie. Brielle smiled politely at her and went quiet with me. That contrast, public warmth and private shutdown, lodged in my mind like a splinter. I could not ignore I tasted something sour and knew it was distrust rising. That night, I sat in the living room with Dana's memorial program on the coffee table. I replayed the last months, the funeral, the church hymns, Brielle holding my mother's shoulders like an anchor, then the new passcode on Brielle's phone, then the porch calls. I hated myself for noticing, like suspicion was a betrayal of my vows. But Dana's death had taught me a blunt truth. Refusing to look at reality does not stop it. It only delays the collision. I promised myself I would not live in denial just to keep peace. I chose clarity over comfort then. 2 days later, I went to a barbershop in Jackson Ward for a haircut. Clippers buzzed and a radio argued with itself between stations. My barber, Mr. Reddick, lined my neck while 2 men debated basketball. A firefighter in uniform walked in, nodded at me, and said, "You are Brielle's husband, right? We miss her on the unit." I smiled and said she was resting. He hesitated like he wanted to say more, then added, "Her old friend has been around the station a lot. Devon Cross. You know him?" I swallowed and pretended the name meant nothing to me, then paid and left. Devon Cross was a name Brielle used like a footnote. She said he was her college boyfriend, charming, controlling, exhausting. She also said they stayed civil. I had never met him and never asked to. On the drive home, the traffic lights smeared through mist and Devon's name floated in my car like smoke. When I parked, my hands trembled on the wheel. Inside, Brielle was folding towels, humming softly. She looked ordinary, and that made my fear feel irrational. I kept quiet, but my mind kept building connections I did not want to see. I cooked lemon chicken that evening, because cooking keeps my hands busy when my emotions threaten to spill. Brielle ate 2 bites, then stared at the wall. "The baby kicked," she said suddenly, switching topics like changing channels. I leaned in and felt a small thump under my palm, and for a moment everything narrowed to that miracle. Then her phone buzzed. She flinched. "I need to call my doctor," she said, and walked toward a laundry room. With a door never latched unless you tugged hard, the hallway felt suddenly narrow, and my chest felt even narrower too. The laundry room sits off the hallway, narrow and warm from the dryer. I heard Brielle's voice through the cracked door, low and tense. "Devon, you cannot keep calling," she said. My body went cold. I stood still, one hand on the wall, like I needed to hold the house steady. Brielle continued, "Marcus thinks the baby is his. It has to stay that way." The words landed like a weight on my lungs. I heard a muffled reply, a male voice. Then Brielle said, "Stop saying our baby. You were not there at the appointments. You were not there for the vomiting." There was a pause. Then Brielle whispered, "I do not know how to fix what I did." The dryer hummed, and the washer clicked like a metronome. My sister's funeral song drifted back in my head, mixing with Brielle's confession until I could not tell grief from anger. I stepped backward quietly, afraid the floor would creak and turn me into a villain in her story. Outside, the streetlight made puddles look like spilled silver. I pressed my forehead to the porch rail and tried to breathe. I wanted to burst back inside and demand answers, but my restraint felt like the only thing I still controlled. When Brielle came out, she tried to smile like nothing happened. "Doctor says I should rest," she said. She touched my arm, light as a question. I looked at her belly, then at her eyes. "Who is Devon?" I asked calmly, because my voice did not feel like mine. Brielle's face emptied. She swallowed and said, "A friend." Her ring tapped fast against her thumb. "A friend you told to stop calling," I said. Her expression sharpened. "You were listening?" she snapped, making me the offender for hearing the truth in my own home. My heart closed as I listened. I did not raise my voice. I said, "I heard enough to know I am not safe in my marriage right now." Brielle's eyes filled, but her chin lifted in defense. "Not tonight," she whispered. She always tried to postpone consequences, as if timing could erase harm. I took my keys and drove to my friend Lionel's apartment near a bus line. Lionel opened the door in sweatpants, chewing ice, and one look at my face changed his posture. He gave me the couch and a blanket without questions. At 2 a.m., I stared at a ceiling fan and thought about Dana, about how she used to tell me to stop shrinking myself to keep other people comfortable. In the morning, I returned home because I needed daylight, proof this was real. Brielle sat at the kitchen table eating toast, looking smaller without night shadows. "I did not sleep," she said, voice flat. I sat across from her and placed my phone on the table like a boundary marker. "I'm going to ask direct questions," I said. "If you dodge them, I will leave and we will speak through lawyers." She flinched at the word lawyers. Brielle folded the corner of a napkin over and over, her anxious habit, then nodded like she was bracing for impact. I could hear a bus stopping outside, its air brakes hissing like impatience. She told me Devon was her first serious relationship. When Dana died, Brielle said she felt life was taking everything, and she had no control. Devon had visited her station for a training event and asked about her. He listened, she said, eyes fixed on my hands. It felt familiar. Then she admitted what familiar became. I asked, "Did you sleep with him?" Brielle nodded once and said, "Once." The word sounded like she wanted it to be a shield. I asked, "Around the time you got pregnant?" She hesitated too long, then whispered, "Yes." I stared at her, hearing the dryer in the other room like a distant engine, and I realized my patience had been used against me. I asked, "Do you know what the baby is mine?" Brielle stared at the table. "I do not know," she said, but it did not match what I had heard. I repeated her words from the laundry room, and Brielle's face flushed. "I was trying to get him to stop," she said quickly. "Devon talks like he owns things." I stared at her. "So you lied to him to manage him, and you lied to me to manage me," I said. Brielle wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand, irritated at her own tears. "I was terrified," she said. "You were grieving. I did not want to break you." That sentence felt like a blade. She had decided my grief made me safe to deceive. I told her we needed a paternity test, the safe kind done through blood, not anything risky. Brielle shook her head hard. "Not now," she said. "It is too stressful." I answered, "Stress is not the truth. Stress is the consequence of hiding it." Brielle stood, palm pressed to her belly. "You are being cruel," she said. I stayed seated. "Cruel is letting me build a nursery for a child you are not sure is mine," I replied. My voice stayed steady, which scared me more than shouting would have. Brielle's eyes narrowed, then softened, then narrowed again, like she could not decide whether to fight or plead. That wavering told me she was still calculating. For a week we moved around each other, like strangers sharing a lease. I slept in the guest room under Dana's old quilt, the one my mother insisted I take. Brielle watched pregnancy videos with the volume low. Every sound felt sharp, the ice maker clicking, the bus hissing at the stop outside, the neighbor's dog barking at dusk. Brielle tried small gestures, offering tea and asking if I had eaten, as if kindness could erase deceit. I accepted none of it as proof. I kept thinking about cause and effect, how one hidden choice turns into 10 hidden decisions. I kept thinking about Dana, about how she never lied when she was scared. She would just say, "I am scared," and let truth do its work. Devon started leaving voicemails. Brielle did not play them, but I saw the missed calls and the way her shoulders tightened. I asked her to block him. She said she did. The next day, his number appeared again under a different name. I did not argue. I just said, "This is what I mean by boundaries. You do not set them. You redesign your lies." Brielle whispered, "He threatens to tell people." I said, "Let him." It was not bravery. It was exhaustion. I could not keep living in a house where I had to compete with secrecy. Brielle's eyes flicked toward the window, like she expected someone to be watching. In that moment, I understood she was afraid of Devon, but she was also afraid of being exposed, and those fears were tangled. My mother invited us to Sunday service. The church smelled like perfume, old wood, and floor polish. I sat beside Brielle while the choir sang, and I felt like I was watching my life. Through a window, people rubbed Brielle's belly and called her glowing. Brielle smiled warmly, the public version of her, and my chest tightened. After service, my mother squeezed my shoulder and said, "Dana would be so happy for you." I almost broke in the vestibule. Brielle's hand tightened on mine, not in love, but in warning. Later, in the car, she said, "Do not tell anyone," as if my grief was a secret she owned. I stared at the wet streets and realized she was still prioritizing control over repair. That night, I told Brielle I could not keep pretending. "If you will not do the test, I will separate until the baby is born." I said. She stared, then said, "You are abandoning me." She used the word like a verdict. I said, "I am protecting myself. Those are different." Brielle's breathing sped up. When she panics, she bargains. "We can do counseling," she said. "We can start fresh." I replied, "Fresh starts require the whole truth, not a curated version." She accused me of being cold. I said, "Cold is what happens when heat is used to hide burns." She turned away and tapped her ring, so fast it sounded like a tiny alarm. We met a counselor in a brick office near a small park. The counselor spoke softly and kept tissues in a neat box. Brielle tried to cry on schedule, wiping her cheeks and looking toward me for reaction. I answered questions like I was in court, slow and careful. When asked why she had Devon, Brielle said, "Marcus can be distant when he grieves." I looked at her and felt a new anger, her habit of explaining her choices by diagnosing mine. I said, "Distance is not permission for betrayal." The counselor asked about accountability. Brielle nodded, but her words stayed vague, like she was painting around the edges instead of naming the stain. I left each session with the same feeling. She wanted comfort more than change. I wanted clarity more than comfort. After 3 sessions, Brielle changed tactics instead of changing behavior. She stopped saving obvious fake names and started using apps I did not recognize. She began taking longer walks alone, claiming her doctor recommended movement. I did not follow her. I refused to become a detective in my own marriage. Instead, I set a boundary. If I caught another lie, I would move out the same day. Brielle said, "You are punishing me." I said, "I am responding to patterns." She stared like I was speaking a foreign language. In her mind, consequences were negotiable. In mine, consequences were the only language that had ever worked. I started packing a duffel quietly, not as a threat, but as preparation. That preparation made her kinder, which made me sad, because it meant kindness was something she could switch on when she felt pressure. One afternoon, thunder rolled, so hard the windows rattled. Brielle was painting the nursery wall a pale blue, humming like she was trying to soothe herself. I stood in the doorway, watching brushstrokes, wanting to believe we could reset. Then her phone rang. She answered without looking at the screen. "Not right now," she hissed. I heard a man's voice, faint but unmistakable. Brielle turned her back to me. That small turn felt like a door slam. I said her name once. She froze, ended the call, and tried to smile. "Wrong number," she said. I held out my hand. "Give me the phone," I said. She clutched it and snapped, "You cannot control me." Her eyes were wild, not from pregnancy, but from being caught mid-lie. The paint smell mixed with something metallic in the air, like fear. She clutched it. "You cannot control me," she snapped. I replied, "I am not controlling you. I am deciding what I live with." Brielle stared, then unlocked the phone and handed it over like it burned. The call log showed the same disguised contact. I tapped the number and listened to the voicemail greeting. "You have reached Devon Cross." My hands went steady, which surprised me. I handed the phone back and said, "Pack a bag." Brielle's eyes widened. "Where am I supposed to go?" she shouted. I said, "Your mother's, your aunt's, a friend's. Anywhere you can be supported without lying to me." Brielle sank onto the nursery floor, paintbrush in hand, and whispered, "I cannot do this." I said, "You already did. Now we deal with it." Her sobs were real, but they arrived after proof, not before. That evening, Brielle left with a suitcase and her prenatal folder. Her mother arrived, eyes narrowed at me, but she kept her voice polite. I watched them drive away and felt an empty relief, like taking off a heavy coat in humid weather. Alone in the house, I noticed how many baby items we had already collected. Tiny socks, a second-hand rocking chair, a stack of parenting books with highlighted lines. I sat on the nursery floor and stared at the blue wall. My grief for Dana returned in a new form, sharp and unfair. I kept thinking, I held your hand at the cemetery, I paid bills, I fixed leaky faucets, I listened, I stayed. None of it stopped her from choosing secrecy. I realized love is not a shield against someone else's character. It is only a mirror, and sometimes a mirror shows you what you did not want to see. Living apart did not make the betrayal stop. It just gave it room to echo. My temporary apartment sat near a busy intersection where late trucks groaned through gears. I ate microwave meals and washed dishes immediately because stillness invited thoughts. Brielle texted daily. Photos of her belly, appointment updates, short apologies that never included specifics. Devon messaged me once from an unknown number. "You do not deserve her," it read. I stared at the screen until it blurred, then deleted it without replying. I refused to enter a triangle where everyone competed for the same story. When I missed Brielle, I tried to separate the real person from the version she performed. When I missed Dana, I let myself say her name out loud, alone in the kitchen like a prayer. Grief made my heart soft. Betrayal forced my spine to stay straight. A few weeks after I moved out, Brielle showed up at my apartment unannounced with a bag of baby clothes. She did not knock softly. She knocked like she had authority. When I opened the door, she stood there with red eyes and a controlled voice. "You are making me look bad," she said. That sentence told me her priority. I stepped into the hallway, so she would not enter my space. "I am not managing your image," I replied. "I am managing my life." She tried to hand me the bag. I did not take it. "We can talk when you agree to the test," I said. Brielle's mouth tightened. "You are impossible," she whispered. I said, "I am consistent." She left the bag by the door anyway, like leaving evidence of her effort, and walked away without looking back. I carried the bag inside and cried once, quietly, because the baby clothes were innocent and my marriage was not. Lionel checked on me almost daily. He would call during his lunch break and ask one question: "Are you eating real food?" It sounds small, but small things kept me from falling apart. One Saturday, he dragged me to a community center basketball game. The gym smelled like polished wood and sweat, and the referee's whistle cut through the noise like a knife. For 2 hours, I yelled at missed shots and forgot my own story. Afterward, Lionel said, "You can be hurt and still be a man." I laughed, then surprised myself by admitting, "I'm afraid I will harden forever." Lionel shook his head. "Hard is not the same as clear," he said. That line stayed with me on the drive home, while streetlights slid across my windshield like moving bars. At work, I started taking longer routes between clinics, not to avoid home, but to let my nervous system settle. I would stop at a corner store for a bottle of water, listen to the door chime, and watch strangers buy lottery tickets like hope was a receipt. One afternoon, I saw a paramedic jacket, like Brielle's, and my chest tightened, then relaxed when I realized it was someone else. My body had learned to expect ambush. That is what betrayal does. It turns ordinary sights into alarms. I began sleeping with my phone face down, not from secrecy, but from fatigue. I stopped checking social media because I did not want to see curated happiness. I started visiting Dana's favorite park during lunch, sitting on a bench and listening to birds argue over crumbs. In those small, quiet moments, I could hear my own thoughts again, separate from Brielle's explanations and Devon's bravado. When labor started, Brielle called me anyway. Her voice was tight and frightened. "Please," she said, "I want you there." I drove to the hospital in heavy rain, wipers moving like frantic hands. In the room, Brielle's face was slick with sweat and fear. She grabbed my wrist hard. "Do not leave me," she whispered. I held her hand because that is who I am, even when my heart is bruised. The baby arrived before dawn, a small boy with a fierce cry. The nurse placed him on Brielle's chest, and Brielle sobbed with relief. I stood there, watching, feeling my life split into before and after. In the hallway, machines beeped steadily. Somewhere down the corridor, a vending machine clanked. The ordinary sound made the moment feel unreal, like the world did not understand what just changed inside me. Family arrived with balloons and casseroles. My mother brought a crochet blanket and smiled through tears. Brielle's mother hugged me too long, as if pressure could glue us back together. Everyone said the baby was beautiful. I stared at his tiny face and searched for myself, like identity could be spotted the way you spot a familiar shape in clouds. He had Brielle's wide eyes and her dimple. That proved nothing. Babies look like possibilities. I held him once and felt his warmth, and a part of me wanted to surrender, to decide love was enough, to never ask hard questions again. Then Brielle's phone buzzed on the chair beside her bed, and she quickly covered the screen with her hand. Even in a hospital gown, she still protected her secrets. That detail steadied me. It reminded me that feelings do not rewrite facts, and new life does not erase old lies. 2 days after we came home, I asked Brielle to sit with me at the kitchen table. The house smelled of formula and lavender lotion. The baby slept in a bassinet, making small squeaks. "We're doing the test," I said. Brielle stared at the ceiling as if searching for mercy. "You are obsessed," she said. I replied, "I am grounded." She rubbed her temples, her stress habit. What if he is yours? She asked. Then we will know, I said, and knowing will stop poisoning everything. Brielle's eyes filled. I wanted a clean start, she said. I looked at the bassinet. A clean start starts with the truth, I answered. She nodded slowly, not in agreement, but in resignation. The resignation mattered, because it meant the test was not her choice. It was reality catching up to her. I kept my voice even, because I did not want my anger to be the headline. Brielle refused prenatal testing, but post-birth felt different to her, like the risk had passed. We ordered a kit and waited. During that week, Brielle tried to perform closeness, cooking my favorite rice dish, asking about my work, sitting near me on the couch. But her eyes kept darting to her phone, and she kept stepping into the hallway for whispers. I heard Devon's name once, followed by "You promised." I did not chase the sound. I was tired of being a man behind doors. I wanted daylight, or I wanted distance. Lionel said I should sleep, but sleep felt like surrender. My mother asked how the baby was, and I answered carefully, because I could not put my mother through another shock without preparing her. In the quiet hours, I watched Brielle rock the baby and wonder how someone could look that tender while still maintaining a lie. That contradiction was the most confusing part. When the kid arrived, my hand shook opening the box. Brielle stood in the doorway with folded arms, defensive posture. I swabbed my cheek first, then held the tiny swab near the baby's mouth. He yawned and waved his fist like a miniature boxer. Brielle turned away and cried quietly. I cannot believe we are here, she said. I answered, neither can I. We mailed the samples and lived in slow motion. Every diaper change felt heavy with implication. Every lullaby sounded like a question. I kept noticing ordinary noises. The clink of bottles, the softness of the heater, the neighbor's footsteps in the hallway. It felt like the world was indifferent to my panic. Brielle tried to talk about future plans, about house hunting, about daycare, about names for the baby book. I did not engage. I only said, after the results. She hated that phrase because it made her wait, and waiting was the one thing she could not control. The results email came on a Wednesday while I was at a clinic repairing a scanner. The machine's glass reflected my face. Tired, older than 29. I stepped into a supply closet and opened the message. The words were plain, clinical, merciless. Probability of paternity, 0%. I read it twice, as if rereading could change DNA. My throat closed. I did not cry. I could not. I walked back out and finished my job on autopilot, tightening bolts and checking calibrations, because routine was the only rope I could hold. When I left the clinic, the sun was bright and wrong. People crossed the parking lot, carrying groceries, laughing, living. I sat in my car and stared at the steering wheel until my hands stopped shaking. Then I drove home, slow, feeling like the road had turned into a hallway with no doors. At home, Brielle was rocking the baby, humming. She looked up and knew from my face. "Marcus," she said, barely audible. I held out my phone. She read the result and made a sound like air leaving a tire. She did not argue. She did not deny. She stared at the baby's head and started shaking. I asked, "Is Devon the father?" Brielle shook her head, then nodded, then whispered, "I think so." Her uncertainty was another betrayal. "You let me believe," I said quietly. "You let my mother hold him like he was our future." Brielle's shoulders collapsed. "I wanted it to be yours," she said. I answered, "Wishing is not honesty." The baby stirred, innocent, unaware. I felt anger at Brielle, anger at Devon, and then a quiet grief of the version of my life I had been building. Brielle reached toward me, then stopped, as if she finally understood touch could not fix this. That night, I slept in my car in a grocery store lot, because I could not breathe in the house. The air smelled like asphalt in summer heat. I thought about calling Dana, then remembered I could not. I thought about telling my mother, then pictured her face collapsing. I thought about leaving forever, then pictured the baby's fist gripping my finger earlier. I realized the hardest part was not losing a marriage. It was losing the story I told myself about who I was: husband, father, protector. Dana used to tell me I tried to carry too much to prove I was strong. Sitting in that car, I finally admitted she was right. I had tried to be the steady one, while Brielle rewrote reality behind my back. The parking lot lights flickered once, and I flinched like I expected another betrayal to appear. That is when I understood the damage had moved into my body, not just my mind. The next day, I met with a family lawyer downtown. The waiting room had outdated magazines and a humming soda machine. The lawyer spoke carefully about presumed paternity, timelines, filings, responsibilities. I listened as if my life had become paperwork. When I returned home to pack more clothes, Brielle stood in the doorway holding the baby. "Do you hate him?" she asked, voice shaking. "No," I said. "He is not guilty." Brielle's tears fell onto the baby's blanket. "I ruined everything," she whispered. I said, "You made choices. We are naming what they cost." She asked if we could work through it. I answered, "Not while the foundation is dishonest." I took my duffel and left without slamming anything, because I refused to give her a scene she could describe as my cruelty. Outside, a delivery truck backed up with a loud beep. I felt absurdly grateful for the noise, because it meant I did not have to listen to her sobs. Brielle moved to her mother's townhouse in a suburb where lawns are trimmed like carpets. I moved into a smaller place near my job, close to a laundromat and a late-night taco stand. People asked about the baby, and I learned to say, "It is complicated," without offering my pain to strangers. My mother cried when I told her, then apologized for crying. Like grief always brings manners. My father went quiet, then hugged me hard, which he rarely does. Brielle's friends texted prayers and questions. I ignored the questions and accepted the prayers. I did not want to debate about whether betrayal counted as betrayal when someone felt lonely. I had no energy for moral gymnastics. I started running in the mornings, not to punish myself, but to quiet the tightness in my chest. Along the river, joggers nodded at me like we shared something. We did not. Still, the nods were reminders that life continued, and I needed to continue too. Devon tried to call me. I did not pick up. He left a voicemail about man to man and doing the right thing. I deleted it. The right thing would have been distance before a baby existed. Still, I kept my language clean in every filing, because anger can turn into mistakes, and I could not afford mistakes. In therapy, I admitted something that embarrassed me. I missed Brielle's laugh even after everything. My therapist said missing a person does not mean betrayal was acceptable. It means I am human. That distinction helped. I started writing down what I had ignored. Her shifting stories, her habit of postponing hard conversations, her need to manage my reactions. Seeing it on paper made it less mystical. It became behavior, not fate. And behavior, unlike fate, can be responded to with boundaries. Months passed. The baby grew into round cheeks and curious eyes. I did not visit, not because I wanted to suffer, but because every visit would have blurred my boundary and reopened the wound. Brielle asked once if I would come to a pediatric appointment for support. I said no. I offered to meet in a public place and talk about paperwork only. She called me cold. I said, cold is better than confused. In late autumn, a mutual friend told me Devon had signed an acknowledgement of paternity. I felt a strange relief, not joy, just relief that the truth had finally forced his hand. Brielle texted, "He is acting like this is a burden." I wanted to reply, because he never planned to carry consequences. Instead, I said nothing. Silence was no longer my weakness. It was my boundary, and I protected it the way I used to protect Brielle, with steadiness and consistency. One evening, I sat alone at Starlight Diner again, the same booth, the same smell of coffee and fryer oil. Outside, wind pushed dead leaves along the curb. The waitress poured coffee and gave me a tired smile. I opened a notebook and wrote what I could control: my sleep, my money, my healing, my honesty. Then I wrote what I could not: Brielle's choices, Devon's character, the baby's DNA, Dana's absence. The list did not fix anything, but it anchored me. I realized I had been trying to manage pain by managing people. That never works. People are not machines you can calibrate. You can only decide what access they have to you. I paid my bill, left a tip, and walked to my car with my collar up against the wind. The night air smelled like exhaust and wet leaves. For the first time in months, my thoughts felt like mine. My mother and I started meeting at a small cafe near her apartment. She always arrived early and chose a table with the best light, like she was preparing for an inspection. She asked careful questions about the divorce, then asked about Dana, and I realized the topics were connected. My sister's death had made me cling to the idea that at least my marriage was solid. When that illusion broke, my grief doubled. My mother reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You do not have to be the strong one every minute," she said. I swallowed hard. I thought if I stayed calm, everything would settle. I admitted. She shook her head gently. "Calm is good," she said, "but calm without truth is just avoidance." That sentence sounded like Dana. I smiled sadly. My mother's eyes softened. "We will miss the baby," she said, "but we will not pretend for the sake of an image." Hearing her say that made my shoulders drop for the first time in a long time. In the sibling loss group, we sat in a circle of plastic chairs under fluorescent lights. A man talked about losing his brother to an accident. A woman talked about losing her sister after a long illness, and the room held their words without rushing them. When my turn came, I spoke about Dana's laugh and how it filled a room. I did not mention Brielle first, but then I admitted the truth. I used my sister's death as a reason to accept less than I deserved, because I feared losing another relationship. Saying it out loud felt like confessing a weakness. The facilitator nodded and said, "Grief can make you bargain with your own needs." That line hit me. I left the meeting and sat in my car, listening to rain tap the roof, realizing I had been bargaining with my dignity. The awareness did not erase pain, but it made my next steps cleaner. Clean steps matter when everything else feels messy. In winter, Brielle asked to meet me at a public library. We sat at a table near tall windows while snow fell in quiet sheets. Brielle looked thinner, hair pulled back, nails chewed. "I am not asking you to forgive me," she said. "I am asking you to understand how I got there." I replied, "Understanding does not erase consequences." She nodded, eyes wet. "Devon is not stepping up like he promised," she admitted. "He disappears." I felt a sharp, unwanted satisfaction, then shame for feeling it. Brielle watched my face and whispered, "I am drowning." I said, "I believe you." Then I added, "But I cannot be your raft if you keep drilling holes in it." We discussed legal timelines, parenting plans, and how communication would work. We did not discuss reconciliation. Brielle's voice shook when she said, "I am sorry I used your grief as cover." That was the first time she named it plainly. After the divorce, I tried one date, a quiet dinner with a woman named Shayna, who worked in accounting. She asked about my last relationship, and I told a simple version, then stopped. She watched me carefully and said, "You do not trust your own judgment yet." I appreciated her honesty. I said, "I am rebuilding it." We talked about books and family, and the way winter sunsets can look like bruised peaches over the river. When she hugged me goodnight, I noticed my shoulders stayed relaxed. That mattered. It meant my body recognized safety again. We did not rush anything. I stopped expecting romance to fix the emptiness Brielle left. I focused on building a life that did not require constant reassurance. Dana used to say, "Choose what chooses you back." I kept that phrase in my head like a compass, not as a slogan, but as a practical filter for who I allow close. After that meeting, I stopped replaying the laundry room moment. It still hurt, but it no longer dominated me. I visited Dana's grave on a cold Saturday, bringing a small bouquet and a letter on plain paper. I told her the truth. I tried to be strong by swallowing pain, and it nearly swallowed me. I told her I was learning to be strong by speaking clearly, leaving when necessary, and not bargaining with my own dignity. The cemetery was quiet except for crows and distant traffic. I imagined Dana rolling her eyes at how long it took me to learn something she knew at 16. I laughed once, then wiped my face. On the drive back, I stopped at a gas station, listened to the beep of the pump, and felt the strange comfort of ordinary tasks. Betrayal turns life into a storm. Ordinary tasks are like a shoreline. You need them to remember you exist beyond the storm. By the next spring, the divorce was finalized. The paperwork felt like closing a door in a house that still smells like someone you loved. Brielle did not fight me. She looked worn, and that was consequence enough in her face. Devon did not show up, which told me everything. Outside the courthouse, a man offered newspapers. I shook my head and kept walking. I realized I was not interested in strangers' stories anymore. I wanted my own to be quiet and true. I rebuilt routines. Early walks, Saturday haircuts, calling my mother every Wednesday, cooking real meals instead of eating out of grief. I started fixing things in my apartment. Small repairs that made the place feel like mine. Each tightened screw felt like a small promise to myself. I would not live as a guest in my own life again. As paperwork moved forward, Brielle sent messages that swung between apology and blame. One day she wrote, "You were not there for me when Dana died." Another day she wrote, "I ruined us." I learned not to answer in the emotional lane she tried to create. I replied with facts, dates, forms, required signatures. It felt cold, but it protected me. When I felt tempted to argue, I remembered the laundry room sentence. It has to stay that way. She had managed reality like a project. I refused to be managed again. I stayed firm, because softness had been used. Sometimes I still see Brielle in the grocery store aisle, pushing a stroller, avoiding my eyes. Sometimes she looks up and nods, a small acknowledgement of the wreckage we share. I nod back. I do not chase her. I do not punish her with speeches. Distance is my boundary, and it keeps me honest. I also remind myself of the child, now a toddler, who did not choose any of this. When bitterness rises, I picture a small fist and let the bitterness pass without acting on it. People ask if I will marry again. I tell them I am learning how to trust without surrendering discernment. Love is not proven by how much pain you tolerate. It is proven by honesty and accountability, especially when it is inconvenient. I learned that too late, but I learned it clearly. If this hit close to home, tell me the moment you knew the truth was coming. Was it the phone, the excuses, or the delay? I want to read your take, because the ending says a lot about boundaries. What I carry from this is not revenge, but clarity. Secrets do not stay small. They recruit more lies to survive. Grief does not excuse betrayal, and compassion does not require self-erasure. I learned to ask direct questions, to request proof when trust is damaged, and to leave when answers are managed instead of given. Brielle faced consequences that could not be negotiated away, and I had to respond without becoming cruel. My takeaway is practical. Boundaries are not threats. They are directions. They protect your dignity and your future, even when love feels complicated. The Yendi.